there, Sid. How you doing? We're on a massively late episode of Idiot Wind, where we're blustering through the definitive vinyl collection of Bob Dylan. And this week we're talking about a very popular album, Love and Theft in inverted commas. And I'll be discussing that with my colleague, of course, Mr. Sid Smith, who's presently in a bathysphere underneath the harbour of Newcastle, the famous city. I'm in a back room in the International Space Station. We'll apologise in advance if the transmission breaks up. We're doing our best to overcome massive technical difficulties. But how you been, Sid? Have you enjoyed listening to Love and Theft?
I've how have I been? I've been fine.
Good. Just a quick, last time we were together, we were discussing Time Out of Mind.
Oh, yeah.
Which was Dylan's big comeback album. He went platinum, got loads of rave reviews, and won the Grammy for Best Album with that comeback. And his popularity and reputation took a massive rise. And just similarly, in a similar way to what he did in the 70s after Blood on the Tracks. And if you remember, shortly after Blood on the Tracks was released to massive acclaim and success, he went back into his archives and released the Basement Tapes double album, thinking, people want that, and now I've proven I can still do it, I can do it. And in a similar kind of way, the year after Time Out of Mind, in 1998, he continued the bootleg series. Remember, in 1991, he released a triple album, 3 CDs in a big box. That was volumes 1, 2, and 3. And this was volume 4. And it was a double album. As with all these things, very nicely presented. It had a hefty book full of erudite notes and photos from the period. And 2 albums. This is the famous, quote, Royal Albert Hall concert, actually filmed at Manchester Free Trade Hall on May the 17th, 1966. The first disc is the acoustic set, and the second disc is the electric set. So you actually hear someone shout Judas on this. It sounds brilliant. It was professionally recorded at the time, and it's been brilliantly brought to life in this release. You hear the Judas moment, which is electric, and you hear his reaction, which is, I don't believe you, to the first in the audience, and then turning to the band and saying, play fucking loud, before they go into the closing Like a Rolling Stone. And it's a bit of history, actually, and it's great to have it in this brilliantly produced form. Volume 4 of the bootleg series was the first of many, and we'll be mentioning them as we go along as they come out. We're now at volume 17 of this set, and with several much bigger sets than this. Also, since Time Out of Mind, he'd won an Oscar as well. One of the songs he'd started out in embryo during the Time Out of Mind sessions was a song called Things Have Changed. And that was finished and fully recorded for the film The Wonder Boys, the movie starring Michael Douglas by the director, I think, of LA Confidential, Curtis Hanson. And it was based on the novel by Michael Chabon, and it was a very entertaining film. And the song in the credits was Dylan singing, I used to care, that things have changed, the chorus. And that won the Oscar for Best Movie Song of that year. And when he won the Oscar, he then started having the Oscar on stage with him every night. So if you're like me, you've seen him a lot in this period. You'll always see the little Oscar at the back of the stage. And then for one tour, I saw him in the 2017, I think it was. He had the Oscar, and then he had his Nobel Prize on stage. And every night, some roadie had to protect these things. And it was very funny, I thought that. Anyway, in 4 years after Time Out of Mind, Dylan went back to the studio, and this is the album he recorded, Love and Theft, 12 tracks recorded in 12 days in New York. Unfortunately, this was released on September the 11th, 2001. Like many albums, I think, that were completely forgotten. Love and Theft hasn't been forgotten, but it was certainly obviously overshadowed at the start by the appalling events in New York. For this, the producer is this mysterious figure, Jack Frost. who produces all of Bob Dylan's albums from now on. And Jack is Bob. It's as simple as that. And unlike Time Out of Mind, where there was a crowd of one huge ensemble, the band on this is basically Dylan's live band. And that is a pattern that is set pretty much in stone from now on. So we've got Larry Campbell and Charlie Sexton, two excellent guitarists on guitar. We've got the ever-present Tony Garnier on bass, who played on Time Out of Mind. David Kemper on drums, the live drummer, who was sent home by Daniel Lenoir off Time Out of Mind. And Augie Mayers playing the organ and accordion. He's just a guest on this. And as you can tell from this, he had Chris Shaw is very much trusted engineer. And they went, this is basically live performances, perhaps cleaned up here and there afterwards, but these are basically very quickly done live performances. He gave the band a listening list. He gave the band old songs, 20s, 30s and 40s American songs. And he said he didn't want to hear these songs, but he wanted to hear the spirit and atmosphere of those songs in the new songs he was going to play for them. I think Larry Campbell says the first new song he heard of this batch was Pole Boy, which is on side 4 of this album, the 10th track, a very weird whimsical song. Campbell was immediately struck by these weren't the usual kind of chords Bob uses. And it's a song that, perhaps an unfortunate tendency, though I think an endearing one, really gives full penchant to Bob's love of dad jokes, or in this case, granddad jokes. This is an album. It's remarkable lyrically, but it is full of terrible puns. At one point he says, "I'm sitting on my watch so I can be on time." And in Pole Boy he says, "I calls room service and says, send me up a room." And he just loves these jokes. And once he starts, it's difficult to stop him, it must be said. The other song that's interesting from the selection of the songs is Mississippi. Mississippi was tried many, many times during the Time Out of Mind sessions, and he'd given up on it. Lenoir didn't really like it. He kept saying to Bob, make it more sexy, Bob, according to Bob. And Bob said, no, I'm not going to make it more sexy. This is a song that's more about the Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Independence than being sexy. And this was typical of the kind of absolutely incomprehensible discussions Lenoir found himself having with Bob. But Bob withdrew the song, thought he'd never record it, gave it to Sheryl Crow, done her own version in between these two albums. And then one of the band, I think again, Larry Campbell, said to him, why don't we do Mississippi? Because they've been doing it live. And so they worked up an arrangement of Mississippi that actually overshadows any of the versions on the Time Out of Mind sessions we've heard on the box set Fragments or on Telltale Signs, which also includes some aspects of those sessions. This album, as I've said, has got the title in inverted commas. That's pretty unique for a Bob Dylan album title, and it's deliberate. The title Love and Theft is taken from a book called Love and Theft, which is a study of the age of minstrelsy, blackface performance in an earlier stage of American history at the time of, the Civil War and around that time. And Dylan had read that book and been very impressed with it, and he liked the phrase love and theft. This is also the album when she began to run into trouble by being accused of plagiarism. There is one terrible example of musical plagiarism on this album, but that's not what the critics were going about. There's a thriller writer called Jeremy Duns, who's a very good poster on Twitter, went into paroxysms of anger. But if you think he's a plagiarist, I suggest you read this book by Professor Richard Thomas, Why Dylan Matters. And he defends the use of other writers in this book on the grounds that it's actually intertextuality, like T.S. Eliot used to do. And he does it very eloquently in this book, and he does it far better than I will do. He's an expert in classics, he's an expert in Roman poetry, and that's very useful on these next two albums because Dylan has been obviously reading loads of Roman poetry on these things. To give a quick example of the kind of things she's been accused of, there's a track on track 5, Lonesome Day Blues. This features quotations or references to things from 3 distinct sources, and these sources pop up throughout the album. The first is a fairly modern Japanese gangster novel called Confessions of a Yakuza, which Dylan had obviously read in translation. He'd obviously read it because there's phrases directly from that book in Lonesome Dame Blues and other songs. And the other one is Mark Twain, Huckleberry Finn. That is also referenced in this song. And the third source is the Roman poet Virgil. And there's a, for example, there's a verse in this where Dylan sings, "I'm going to spare the defeated. I'm going to talk to the crowd. I'm going to spare the defeated, boys. I'm going to talk to the crowd." That verse, every line of that, 4 lines of that verse is basically a quotation from Virgil. Professor Thomas works out a very eloquent case where he says he's trying to conflate time. He's telescoping time together. A lot of these songs, these sources, concern warfare, whether it's gang warfare, it's the civil war in Twain, and it's the warfare of the Roman era in Virgil. And what he's trying to do is create songs that are about no war specifically, but every war. And he's also trying to talk about the fact that nothing really changes. He's very intrigued with Virgil, as is Professor Thomas, because in the book he demonstrates that, you know, we have a view nowadays. I've heard it expressed to me, you know, when I studied English literature at university, and people say, yeah, what's the point of that? No one, when they were writing all these classic books, no one taught them in university then, did they? And these writers didn't go to university and all that, you know. Virgil lived about 100 years before Christ was born, and he was very famous in Rome, and his work was taught in educational establishments in Rome to students during his lifetime, which is an extraordinary thing, isn't it? When you think how you're talking about more than 2,000 years ago. He was someone who came from a backwater in the Roman Empire, came to Rome, the big metropolis, to make his name, and quickly found his fame so enormous that he literally couldn't walk down the street. You know, he used to hide out in friends' houses because people would accost him in the street and follow him wherever he went. Eventually, he moves out of the city to a much more quieter part of Italy, and he continues to work with great fame and acclaim and riches. He becomes rich through his work in ancient Rome. They estimate that when he died, the amount of money he had it accrued would be equivalent to about 10 million American dollars today. So I wonder what Bob Dylan sees as the parallels in this situation. Everything. Another thing about Virgil is, of course, he was himself accused of plagiarism during his lifetime, which Dylan is obviously using it deliberately before he's accused on this album. He was accused of plagiarizing Homer. And in fact, Professor Brooks says he wasn't plagiarizing him. He was using Homer's version of the Greek conflicts to shine a light, to reshape them and shine a light on the conflicts and issues in ancient Rome. But in his own lifetime, you know, and there were biographies published of him shortly after his death, you know, those biographers, like Professor Brooks, defend him around the time of the birth of Christ against these accusations of plagiarism. Anyway, he's one of the big sources on this. What's unique about this album is, first of all, the sound of it. It sounds like the live band. This sounds like, on the Lenoir album, Time Out of Mind, there's this huge ambient fog around the music. There's none of this then. Perhaps this is what Dylan preferred. He wanted his band and he wanted to make them sound like they're playing live in a bar. So I think this is a fun album. I think this sounds very clear and very exciting, and it's quite a varied set of songs. As far as the lyrics go and what he's trying to do, I'm just going to focus on one song quickly. High Water, track 7, brackets for Charlie Patton. High Water is, to me, one of his most lyrically interesting songs. It sounds like it's about a flood at the time of the American Civil War. Dylan then deliberately shakes up the time scheme so you don't know when it's actually taking place. There are a number of things in it that don't fit into that world. He talks about his car at one point and asking the woman he's with to throw her panties overboard, which doesn't really seem to be in line with a song about terrible poverty caused by a massive flood in the American Midwest. What's interesting about the song is that I think it can be taken two ways. For years, I've thought the flood in the song is ignorance and people are fighting ignorance. I'm no longer sure that's true. I think it could be taken a couple of ways. In the first verse, he references Big Joe Turner, who's an old musician and singer, a man who Doc Pomus said, without whom rock and roll could never have happened. So this is someone who's very important to Dylan and roots this song in the beginning of the form in which he's made his living. And so I've thought for years later on he's mentioning other singers. So in the next verse or the third verse or something, he mentions Bertha Mason. Bertha Mason took it, shook it, and threw it at the wall. She said that you dance with whom they tell you with, or you don't dance at all. And for years I thought, well, Bertha Mason, I don't know who it is, but maybe it's some blues singer or something from early popular music. That's not true, though. Bertha Mason is the maiden name of the First Lady Rochester in Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. She's the archetypal mad woman in the attic. So when she said, you dance with whom they tell you to, or you don't dance at all, she's literally speaking with the voice of insanity, right? So that's one thing. A couple of verses later, George Lewis told the Englishman, the Italian, and the Jew, you can't open up your mind, boys, to every conceivable point of view. George Lewis, well, he spells it with an IS on the lyric sheet, but he doesn't mean any George Lewis. There's a musician called George Lewis, and he's presumably trying to throw us off the scent. But that line, you can't open up your mind, boys, to every conceivable point of view, as well as the evidence of the line after that, reveal that Dylan is talking about George Lewis, Lewes, who was a Victorian philosopher and writer. He wrote The Life of Goethe, which is a very acclaimed book at the time. And he was a scandalous figure because he, even though he was married to another woman, he lived quite openly with a woman called Mary Ann Evans, who's better known as the novelist George Eliot, author of The Mill on the Floss and Middlemarch. And they were scandalous. Queen Victoria read George Eliot's books, but she never admitted it to anyone. She wouldn't ever admit it. She had them in the library at the palace, and she never mentioned George Eliot's name because it just wasn't done. And George Lewis, in one of his major philosophical works, both him and Evans, George Eliot, were atheists. And he also had a view that the human mind, the brain, was a brilliant thing, but it was too primitive to fully comprehend and understand the nature of the universe. He thought we just weren't built to be able to understand the majesty and complexity of the universe. But he absolutely ruled out that could mean there was any supernatural or spiritual reason for the universe to exist. That point of view is crystallized in the line in the Dylan song, you can't open up your mind, boys, to every conceivable point of view, which is delivered to the Englishman, the Italian, and the Jew, who are obviously representatives of Protestantism, Catholicism, and Judaism. This is somebody saying his view of the universe to people he's in opposition to, who are representatives of the three major religions in Dylan's life. That fact, it's that George Lewis is emphasized by the next line. They've got Charles Darwin trapped out there on Highway 5. The judge says to the high sheriff, I want him dead or alive. Either one, I don't care. Charles Darwin is not just an exact contemporary of George Lewis, he's a friend of his. They corresponded, and Darwin and his wife went to have dinner with Evans and Lewis at their house, and vice versa. They were mates. And I've thought for years, maybe Dylan is saying, this is the high water is ignorance, the flood is ignorance. The people in those areas of America, They want Charles Darwin, and they don't care if he's dead or alive. We all know that Charles Darwin isn't taught in a lot of schools in America because you can't teach evolution. And that might be true. I mean, it's just as true. Dylan supports Obama. He always supports the Democrat. He's left of centre in a kind of centrist way on politics. But some believe Bob is actually in favour of trapping Charles Darwin on that road and wanting him dead or alive. And in their interpretation of the lyric, the judge is God and the high sheriff is Christ. Now, I don't know if that's true, but I think the openness to interpretation of the song is key to its brilliance, really. So you've got all these different periods. You've got the Victorian England, represented by literary and philosophical figures, and a scientist. You've got their views in opposition to representatives of established religion. You've got a strange verse about the car and a woman throwing her panties overboard. And it all builds up to a line where, and again, this is another possible interpretation, that the narrator, Dylan, in the song is full of confusion and lack of empathy. And at the end of the song, one of the final things he sings is, you know, to a woman in his life, you know, I can't be happy unless you're happy too. And that is presented in the way of it's kind of a hard-won realization. And I think it's also possible that he's going through all these literary, philosophical, religious, political confusions in his mind to strip them away and get down to this simple thing. The most important thing is you, and I've been an idiot for not realizing that, despite how clever I think I am. At one point, a woman says to him, no matter how great you are, you'll never be greater than yourself, says to him. And to which he replies, I told her I didn't really care. A common line in later Dylan. But I think the depth of literary and historical knowledge and allusion in that song is unimaginable for just about any other rock lyricist or pop lyricist. I think it's an astonishing demonstration of the power he's got and the knowledge he's got of literature of many different cultures and of history. I can't think of any other writer who could bring that off. Throughout the album, there are some great songs. There are a couple of fillers, I think, on this album, as there are on many of his albums, but mainly, I think this album is great. Mississippi itself is a brilliant song. Tweedledee and Tweedledum has got an outrageous example of musical plagiarism. It's actually the music is actually a tune called Uncle Joe's Bongos or Uncle John's Bongos or something. If you put that into YouTube, you'll hear that tune coming out. And because of the kind of Tweedledee, Tweedledum lyrics, I've written that off for years, that song, but that's actually Cain and Abel. And it's also two sides of a warring personality, something I've recently realized and makes that song very interesting. Summer Days is quite funny because he always used to play Summer Days live for years after this album came out. He really enjoyed playing it. It's just about a past that he's no longer in and no longer as happy, but it sounds very jolly. And at one point he says you can't relive the past. I said, of course you can relive the past. Of course you can. What do you mean you can't relive the past? Of course you can. He somehow fits that in. That's a quotation from F. Scott Fitzgerald. And on we go. He finishes with Sugar Baby, a very atmospheric, sultry track that starts with a line he tried to get onto Time Out of Mind, about the sun being so intense and he realizing what the whole world is up against, but he couldn't manage to make it fit anywhere, so he's written a whole new song so he can get it on the end of this album, and that stands out. That's quite dramatically atmospheric compared to the rest of it. Overall, I think this is one of the most, of all his albums, this is probably among the most fun of his albums, but at the same time, there's some really deep work gone on in the lyric writing, and there's some great tunes. What did you think of it, Sid?
I didn't know the album before coming to it for this chat. I thought on the surface of things, without knowing any of the background to it, I hadn't read anything about it. Well, still haven't read anything about it, but I enjoyed the sound of it, actually. As you say, obviously a very different ambient sound to the album before with Daniel Lanois. And it's a kind of nice, kind of cozy, old-timey recreation of a particular kind of American song. There's lots of that going on, and actually it reminded me of a lot of stuff I used to listen to in the late 80s and 90s. Artists like
Spandau Ballet,
Sun Volt, and Lyle Lovett, and there's another one. There's a woman who's on the tip of my mind, possibly KD Lang. All of those kind of alt country people who kind of came up in the 80s and 90s. And I used to, for a whole variety of reasons, I was listening to quite a bit of that stuff at the time, and this album reminded me of that. And I don't mean that in a disparaging way at all. It was just that there seemed to be a kind of a sort of a connection of mood and sound, I guess. So that was all right. I didn't mind it. I didn't particularly connect to it, but the truth is I don't. As I always say in these circumstances, I'm definitely not the target audience for this music, but it was fine. I hear what you're saying about all of the literary stuff, and just for the record, I mean, I don't know about the allegations of plagiarism and stuff. I mean, it seems to me to be, sort of fairly standard course that people mix and match and take kind of lines from poetry and various other sources. That's part of the course, and it seems a bit nitpicky to say that Dylan's ripping off somebody. I mean, it's you pick different things out of the air when you're an artist and meld them into your own, and I'm pretty sure that's what Dylan's done here. And I think that's also true when you get into the bones of American song. This sounds like a Chuck Berry song, which in turn sounds like and you just Sleepy John Esther's, and you just kind of go backwards and forwards.
Definitely.
And none of that's about plagiarism. It's just about it's about the form. That brings me to the point I was originally going to make, which was the problem I have is, and we're running out of time, amazingly enough. But the problem I have is for all the work that Dylan puts into the lyrics and the layering that you described, which was really interesting to hear that, and it might make me go back and listen to some of this stuff with different ears, perhaps. Is by the time he's done all that, he's clearly too tired to give a rat's arse about putting any fucking work whatsoever into a decent melody. And that's the problem for me. He's got a line, and then he says, that melody line, that'll do for 7 minutes. That's great. And we'll just run it. I've got all these verses. Ooh, shall I edit them down a bit? Oh no, let's just keep them going. And it's like, for fuck's sake, give us a break. So my response to Mississippi, which Mississippi I thought oh, I like this. This is good. And then we got past the 3 minutes, and I'm sort of saying, all right, okay. And then we got past the 4 minutes, and then 5 minutes loomed up, and then went by. Carried on, and the only thing I did wrong was I stayed in Mississippi a day too long. Well, actually, the only thing you did wrong was not writing a fucking shorter song, you Burke.
Well, on that subject, I think this is, as well as one of his most fun albums, one of his funniest, and there's a great moment, and it must be about 4.5 minutes in Mississippi, where he's obviously begging the woman to give him another chance. and he sings this great line: "Stick with me, baby, stick with me anyhow. Things should start to get interesting right about now," which is obviously a joke, and it's so dry. And it's funny in the context of the relationship. She's obviously been in a relationship for some time with him, and she's pretty pissed off with him. He goes, "Oh, stick with me. Things will start to get interesting."
I know how she feels.
Yeah, but also in the song, it's hilarious because it's nearly at the end of the song, and it always makes me smile, that line.
If I had to pick one song off the album, it would be "Summer Days," which has the benefit of a bit of sparkle, a bit of get up and go. It reminds me a bit of Duquesne Whistle.
You like that one, don't you?
From the later album Tempest. And it kind of cracks along. What's the one track that you would choose from this album?
I think Mississippi is probably the best song, but my favourite is High Water, because there's so much in High Water. It just fascinates me, the lyrics, and I like the music as well. The music's quite dramatic, I think.
Okay, what's the album we're going to discuss next?
Well, next time we'll be talking about Modern Times.